Good evening. So in the course of doing really any spiritual practice or meditation practice, and particularly the purification of mind practices of the samatha portion of the Theravadan path, we're going to release a lot of memories, convictions, beliefs as we practice, and those get challenged, even not that they're challenged directly, but like in this practice, we're identifying unconscious building blocks of the self, which are the four elements. And as we recognize those, they get lighter, some will fall away, and often we're left with what's not the four elements, if that makes sense. But what will happen is any memories, again, convictions, beliefs we have that are relating to any aspect of the practice is going to be kicked up. So it's common for you to have memories, individuals, just all sorts of inner process arise in these practices. The general rule is that we don't want to turn and engage those items or work those issues unless they block the meditation or practice. So if they get in our way, then we'll turn to them, we'll address them, and then we'll come back to it. Generally, it's a good idea to just make some notes to yourself about sort of what you're seeing, who you're seeing, because you can come back later and look at those things. And many of those may be ready for a little bit of work and a kind of release. Sometimes all they need for release is for us to just continue with the practice. They're not that dug in, let's say. They've got shallow roots and they just float away. And others require more work. They're more complicated. So just as a general rule, at least for my own practice, and what I recommend is to not pick those things up unless either they're really important to you, a relationship that's really critical, or some issue that's really a challenging one. Then you might want to engage that. But no, if you do, you're also letting go a certain amount of the concentration, head of steam you've developed. And that's just how it works. So we have to balance these things. So there's no like right or wrong answer, but typically we stay with the meditation unless we're blocked from doing so. And you really won't see the impact of this practice until you return to your regular life and the relationships and the jobs and all the things. Then you'll start seeing how you're interacting. I once did a Brahma Vihara's retreat, and this one woman was quite adamant that the retreat hadn't changed anything. I did the practices, nothing is different. And I said, okay, that's how it is. And about 3 days later, I get an email, oh my God. So I got home, my husband said the stuff he says that always triggers me, and I watched it just pass right through. She's like, this is amazing. This is, life altering. So you never know until you get back into the mix, kind of where you are and who you are. And that's why I usually recommend to people really go slow on having the personality reconstruct. It's sort of like scaffolding outside a building. It gets sort of pulled apart on retreat. And then if we take our time letting it come together slowly, we can make some affirmative choices on, I'm going to change this behavior, I'm going to drop that attitude, or whatever it is. But you can see spots for changes to make your life be more congruent with what you're seeing about yourself here. So just, when you leave, there's still more days left, but really go slow. Don't be quick to be the normal you. Really be open and wonder. I wanted to talk tonight a little bit about cessation. And I like to do this in part because it isn't something that's talked about very much, and I think to have more understanding is beneficial for the Buddhist community and for practitioners. And typically the way that one would access cessation in a normal progression of Theravada Buddhism would be one would do all the purification of mind samatha practices. So that would include all 8 jhanas, Brahma Viharas, a bunch of other supplemental material, the 4 elements, 32 body parts, skeleton. I mentioned the kasinas last night, and there's probably others I'm forgetting about. But there's a whole host of practices. And then after 4 elements, one begins the Vipassana. In Myanmar at Pawak Monastery, one would then, as I mentioned one night, would begin by analyzing kalapas once kalapas were witnessed. And then that leads to analyzing both material and mental kalapas and seeing their components, which I think, like the 4 elements, would lessen, release them. I mean, I've mentioned I haven't done that practice, so I'm speaking hypothetically about it. I know people who have, but I have not. And really for me it was because the Zen path is a bodhisattva path and the Theravadan path is an arahant path. And there's a point when you have to choose one or the other. You can't do both. And since I was firmly committed on the bodhisattva path, I didn't pick up the rest of the Theravadan path. But normally one would progress to the Theravadan path as Pawak teaches it. It's quite interesting. There's one point where one does past life recall. So you're expected to go back 5 lifetimes, and you have to know specifics, name, location, family members, favorite foods, all these very particular items for each lifetime. I mean, I don't know how it's ever verified, but people do it. And then the interesting part to me is, that's interesting, but the more interesting part is you go forward 5 lifetimes. Now that's really interesting to me. But the main point is you're going forward to see the lifetime you become an arahant. That's the point, is to see that the progression of your prior lifetimes getting here, and then what's next to finish the path. And of course the arahant ideal is to get off the wheel of existence. So no more rebirth. You're done. You merge back into the absolute, and that's it. So it's a different model. As I say, the bodhisattva model is that you're continue to be reborn until all beings are realized or saved. And then one can then make a choice. But the normal way one accesses cessation is after the past life and future life work. Then there's working with the arising and passing away of phenomenon. So one sees everything, your physicality, your mentality, all the resistances and things arise, pause and pass away. And once that's very established, then one focuses just on the passing away, just on the disappearing. And the reason that gets significant is because it's disappearing into something. It's disappearing into the absolute, into the absence. And as we start doing that, it starts orienting us toward the absence. And the instructions are that one then takes Nibbana and cessation are the same, takes Nibbana as their object. So you can see there's still a duality. I'm taking Nibbana as an object, I'm meditating on this, and then potentially cessation will open and there'll be a merged experience, a merged with no remainders. And the experience of cessation, in my experience with students, right now I'm working with a theory that it has to be at least 30 minutes in duration. It seems like anything less than that is impactful, but it's not changing. 30 minutes or more is changing. And that's really what I'm seeing. So that's really, at least in my view, when one would call stream entry would be after a 30-minute immersion. And also looking at their life, is their life changing for the better? And then looking at, like in Mystifying Awakening, I've got all the categories of the 4 stages of awakening and the different features. So one would then look and see, what's here in my experience, what's not. And from there, try to make an assessment of where it is. In talking with other Theravadan teachers, Western teachers, I've asked them, well, there's a lot of you people out there. How do you, what's the standard for establishing confirming who's had cessation and stream entry and who hasn't. And I was told it's an art, it's a term of art. So which basically means that everybody has their own standard. That's how I take it. So it isn't uniform. So anyway, that's an aside. But so that's the traditional way of opening into cessation. It's also possible to spontaneously have cessation arise. That happens in a very small percentage of people. It does happen, but it's not common. I've had people enter cessation through the guided meditations I do. So that's one way that it happens. And then the other is when one completes all 8 jhanas, there's a possibility. Every jhana has an access concentration and an absorption. And so before the absorption happens, one is practicing in the access concentration. So for 8th jhana, it'll have an access concentration where you're doing whatever you're doing with the 8th jhana. And then once the 8th jhana arises, then the awareness is out of access concentration and absorption. But in access concentration of the 8th jhana, there's a potential to open and enter into the absolute. There's a portal. And I know a few people that have used that portal. And that led to cessation for the people I know that went in that way. So there's several ways it can happen. But I just want to kind of talk about this a little bit to get it a little bit more in our language and also normalize some of it too. Because it's talked about in some odd ways sometimes. I've heard teachers and even monastics speak about it in ways that I thought were unusual. Any questions? And one last thing. Tomorrow in your meditation, I'm suggesting that as you are cycling through the 4 elements, the non-conceptual 4 elements, and I mentioned the other night, I mean, my advice is even to get it to the point where it's almost like 4 people on the couch in front of you, and you're just sort of, You're not even getting into, who's what, but just cycling through is a good way to go. But what I'd suggest you do is, like sitting here, I can feel my back, my lower body, and my feet contacting the chair or the ground. So feel that support. That's not your primary object, but hold it as a supplemental, kind of open the awareness to include that while you cycle through. Because I think having that structure and support will be advantageous to the development of the practice.